Sexual abuse, assault and all that it entails is a serious issue today. People are also trying to put an end to it. Unfortunately though, their way of dealing with it doesn't actually go that well. Sure, society puts a lot of people to justice, so to speak, but that says more about how bad it is in general than actually fixing the issue. If so many people are caught all the time doing horrible things, then how many more are there that aren't caught? From what I've heard, it's supposedly only a fraction of them that are dealt with. Even worse is that people believe we're actually making a significant difference just by punishing individuals. But as they just keep coming year after year, it's clearly not stopping it anytime soon. Sure, enacting punishments may decrease it to some degree and make people less prone to do such things due to fear of punishment, but sometimes you wonder if people are punishing perpetrators for the sake of the perpetrators themselves instead of it being for the victims and for other potential ones so they won't have to become victims of these things. If it's actually not for the perpetrators but for the other group, one should have more preventative measures in place and, yes, there are of course other things people are trying to do to prevent these things. Other than that, one also tries to educate and influence people in the hopes of preventing them from doing such things and developing such behaviors and traits. I have to admit, there have been some differences in the original population, but another problem that has arisen is the declining birth rate among them. What also has happened is that one has decided to import people from elsewhere, also known as immigration, in order to compensate for this. These people also come with many that don't have the same standards and values and most importantly to our case not as sexually humane behaviors. It helps deal with the lack of people, but in turn also contributes to making sexual ethics worse. In the end we're back to square one again, more or less. Those who do not develop sexual ethics, which I want to clarify is not just immigrants, in the end take over the sexually considerate population simply by increasing in numbers through being sexually active while the others are decreasing as they can't maintain their numbers. So, all our efforts have been in vain, you say? Not quite. It's true that it does help individuals in their individual cases right now, don't get me wrong. But the unfortunate thing is that it makes things worse in the future. But why is this? It's the result of humans who are messing with human society, and don't know what they're doing. It's not because their intentions are necessarily wrong, not that the laws of this world and the mechanics of human society care about your intentions, but because they're dealing with this issue like frickin' amateurs. Seriously though, let me quickly explain why this doesn't work. The main drive in nature for sexual animals, including humans, to breed and thus get offspring is being driven by sexual urges to mate, not thinking or worrying about the consequences or how the other individuals they're mating with feels about it. With all the moral, ethical and practical things people have to consider and all the worry about not hurting anyone's feelings, people have a lot of things that are hindering them to get down to business sexually, so to speak, in a way that leads to reproduction, and thus maintaining the sexually ethical population doesn't happen, and so it is shrinking and automatically replaced with others who don't possess those ethical traits. Simply put, being sexually considerate towards others goes hand in hand with a shrinking population. On the other hand, those who doesn't have such characteristics have no issue maintaining population, but in turn also are terrible people to some degree, and the offspring they're getting obviously carry their traits and behaviors, including their lack of sexual consideration ethics. Thus the population levels of sexually abusive, assaulting people doesn't decrease, despite all our efforts. Now you can also understand how being sexually abusive towards others and being very irrational in this area is such an evolutionary advantage over being nice and considerate. Our problem though is that building a society free from sexual abuse, assault with such people isn't going to work, no matter how much evolution favors them. Nature sure is a pain to deal with, right? Fortunately for us though, there is a simple solution to this issue and a way to outsmart evolution and natural selection to even do our bidding to some degree in this particular case. Note that though I said simple, it doesn't mean it's easy. Now, what is it exactly that would be so revolutionary that it could fix this issue? It's something that would make humans' natural and sexual reproduction obsolete. The thing I'm talking about is creating an artificial human reproductive system using technology and science. When I say system, I'm not just talking about a single machine or device, but a system in society that has many different kinds of machines and devices integrated into its structure. One that doesn't need humans' biological material or anything from them in order to produce new human individuals. The process could of course take samples from humans with the ideal traits at first in order to get something like a source of embryonic stem cells to develop humans from, but after establishing an artificial source of what one needs from humans in this process, one would no longer do that anymore. This would also include not being dependent on a female human's womb for the human development stages before birth. To add to this, there are other things that needs to be done as well. When one gets such a system going, it is imperative that all human reproduction is done this way, which also means that all natural forms of it must cease permanently in order for this to work. Note that it doesn't necessarily have to include prohibiting people from engaging in sexual activities with others, as long as it doesn't involve sexual reproduction. That is to say, as long as you can ensure that no such things leads to pregnancy, you could, in theory, allow people to do whatever one's permitting currently. Practically though, seeing how someone usually manages to mess up these kinds of things that are vital for a drastic change for the better to occur in human society, one will probably have to put on some more restrictions than what are currently in place to ensure this doesn't happen. It's either that or making sure that everyone that does get pregnant gets an abortion. Some people don't like that though. A third option would be to sterilize every single individual. In that case, one just has to make sure one has established the artificial human reproduction system in a way that practically works, or we will have a big problem to deal with. There's not a specific method that is required here, as long as one prohibits people from being reproduced and born naturally. In theory, one could also neglect being responsible in this area and instead just have an agency that kills off all people coming into the world that way, like a dystopian horror movie, but I think we all, at least officially, agree that that's a pretty terrible option. Anyway, as for the system of how to divide the responsibility to raise these children, I think that is something so simple that society can easily come up with a solution to that on their own without me giving any suggestions. Simply just make a system that shares that responsibility in some way. One can even keep the family model that already exists. The only difference is that the new children and parent-like figures aren't related like they used to be, but as people are already taking care of children that aren't their own today, and it in many cases also goes well, this should also be something that is practically doable. As you can probably imagine, people would have to work hard to establish such a system and make it practically workable, but after one establishes such a thing, though, the change it was established for would come naturally. It would make the natural human sexual reproduction system obsolete and would make all those traits and features, especially those unpleasant sexually abusive and assaulting behaviors we're looking to get rid of, an evolutionary disadvantage in human society. This is because we won't depend on people being in the heat, sexually, and sexually aggressive so they have sexual intercourse, so women become pregnant so they give birth to humans in order that we get enough humans to keep up the population. In its place, the head of the system, probably something like governments, would just make sure that enough humans are born every year to maintain the population that one would ideally want to have. Such traits would then disappear as they soon would only be seen as a burden. For example, today people, more than ever, need their brain cells and nerve system for skill learning as well as mental processing of all the information they have to deal with in their daily lives. It's already a major burden for people at work and at school to focus on doing intellectual tasks, learning new things, etc., partly because of these kinds of thoughts and urges being in the way and distracting them, and that will only increase as the academic and intellectual standards and complexity of the tasks one has to do there are only increasing. The sexual thoughts and urges are quite a hindrance to this already, as many people can probably testify. Other than that, sexual desires and sexual love hinders people from being rational in thought and conduct, and also has a terrible effect on mental stability, which we can see today how detrimental it is for many. Anyway, As for how those traits would be removed practically, scientific research and technological development would allow us to figure out what traits cause these things and allow us to modify people accordingly in order to make them disappear from those already living and those being born. That would especially include the sexual traits that drive humans to sexually abuse/assault others as well, as no one would like to go through such an experience. Well, there are those people that would, but such traits are also part of those things we will have to make sure to eradicate as well, removing any and all masochistic and sadistic traits alike. At that time, not even evolution and natural selection would be able to protect sexually abusive/assaulting people anymore from going extinct. They would slowly but surely disappear until they're all gone, and that would also be the end of our problem. Before I end this video, I want to clarify that the purpose of this video is not to make the ways and methods currently used to combat these things go away. I would also prefer that this issue didn't exist, and that's exactly why I've made this video, to not only point out the fundamental problem with the main methods currently being used, but also address what they lack in order to truly be effective. As you can see, the new way I presented doesn't exclude any of them, but simply completes them to the point where they will make a permanent change in our society by dealing with the root cause of this issue. Also, I know this video is at least a bit unprofessional and some things are lacking in the details of the practical part of making this a reality, but I hope it will at least give a general idea of a way this issue can be solved. Another thing I want to mention is that I'm aware that artificial human reproduction is already being researched, and the technology for making human reproduction without humans is already underway to some degree. I know that what I've described in this video could have happened eventually, by itself, without me saying anything, but it also has a lot of resistance and is currently extremely slow. I would prefer that it went a lot faster, and ideally so fast that I would be able to see all this within my lifetime, and that with a lot of time to spare. The faster the better, in my opinion. A final thing I would like to say is that it would be wise to implement the same kind of thing on animals, mainly those near humans and especially those used as pets. This is because, if you didn't already know, that it does happen that animals sexually abuse/assault humans. The so-called man's best friend isn't always the man's best friend, but sometimes it's a monster. The end.